Hey everyone, just Ben here again, and this is the second part to the month of January for what I'm calling my update to 2020 reading challenge. In my first part, I went over a few of the books I'd already read in January, and as promised, I'm going to do the rest of the the last series I read, as well as the audiobooks I listened to in January. Starting with the audiobooks, because I want to get those off my chest, and the series is going to be only discussed a little bit because I still want to do a dedicated review to that series. Of the audiobooks I listened to, the first one was the Twinborn Chronicles Awakening Collection. It's the first three books in a dual trilogy series. In Twinborn Chronicles, the world we are introduced to is two different worlds. The main character is a scribe in a medieval, sort of medieval town. They do have a printing press, so it's a little bit more farther into the future than that. Victorian, maybe, era. I'm not very familiar with historical eras to really say, but because I read the description of it, I wasn't completely surprised by what was happening or completely confused, but he would have his day go on, and then he would go to sleep at night, and then the next chapter would pick up with a knight in a very magically dense world that is your typical fantasy world. And in the fantasy world, this knight is dealing with the problem of somebody is helping supply goblins with knowledge in order to help take over the country he's from. Now, the country he's from they're an empire that has been doing bad things in the past to gain power, so nobody really likes them, but he is loyal to his nation. And the whole concept of the series is come to find out that both this scribe and this knight are the same person, but in two different worlds. Hence the name Twinborn. He's not the only one. There are several others, and the whole trilogy comes out to be these conspiracies that happen between these Twinborns, passing knowledge to each other through their other selves between worlds. Without reading it, that sounds super confusing, but is actually really interesting. This leads to them switching places actually at one point, and because of this, there's a unique aspect of how magic is split between the two different Twinborns, and how just the typical fantasy story kind of takes a weird step when it's split between two worlds. The second thing I listened to audiobook wise was another Twinborn Chronicles trilogy. It's The War of Three Worlds. Now, in this one, not many of the characters are brought up, but they are kind of they're tertiary characters in the second trilogy if they're from the first trilogy. Because in the second trilogy, we start getting the point of views of characters in the world the scribe was from, which would be the most similar to real world Earth. There's magic, but very little of it. It's more technologically based. And the second world we're presented is a world where humans are slaves. There's another race that won out in a war in the past, and because of this, they have pretty much given humans the level as slaves, and there's a rebellion going on in that world by using the freedom in normal world to create a way to transport people and weapons to the human slave world. But in the human slave world, they've been stealing the technology from there to build in the real world. And it's just a very unique story that leads to eventually, with the ability to transport people between worlds, they create a portal. It brings in the other world from the first trilogy that's very heavily built around magic. And alliances are made, and they are attempting to fight this out by using people from all three worlds, and eventually leading to almost like we're talking World War, but cross World War concepts of level of fighting. And both trilogies I found very enjoyable. I love the concept of people being in two different worlds. So it was a very unique setting to listen to a story in. The third audiobook I listened to in January, or series of books, is I listened to the complete Chronicles of Narnia, all 7 books in one audiobook. And I have to say, I don't know why I haven't read them yet, because being slightly familiar with the series from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the movie being released, it was very interesting to listen to the books because there's so much more, because there is a small book before The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe that kind of explained the origins of the whole Chronicles of Narnia series. And also, I know there are other movies out, but there seems to be a little like side story type of book between the core books that have been made in the movies. The series as a whole, it's very interesting to see how there is the time difference passing between Narnia and the real world, so that these kids can go back at different points in time to have a whole new adventure, and they are able to help save Narnia over and over again. And this is a good example of, I read Harry Potter finally for the first time not too long ago. I didn't enjoy it that much, but I kept being told by people, well, it was written for kids or teenagers, so that's probably why you don't like it. Well, I just recently listened to Chronicles of Narnia, and that is written for kids. Very much so, the way it's written is written for kids, like telling a kid a story. And I can say without a doubt that I thought they were wonderful. So just because something's written for kids does not mean it's going to be bad if you're an adult. And I think that being able to write a kid's story that is still enjoyable for an adult to read, or in my case, listen to, makes it that much better than a story that's only enjoyable for kids. So, with the audiobooks out of the way, I'm going to talk a little bit about the final series I read in the month of January, with the last couple of books being the beginning of February. This series by Nathan Lowell is the Golden Age of the Solar Clipper. I looked it up, and there are actually other books within the Solar Clipper world. This one I'd have to find is specifically the one person's point of view or series about his story, and this series is quite enjoyable. This is a series that takes place in a futuristic world where we have been able to travel between worlds already. It seems that the universe is not completely explored, obviously, but trade happens from planet to planet, and the trade ships in this world are very much so more of your classic sailing ships for the Golden Age of Pirates type era, Golden Age trade vessels like that. And our main character is in a position where he has to leave his home, and because of the way planets work, he doesn't have the money to get off planet by himself. His options are join the military or join the trade organization, which the trade organization I think is also written in a way that is very much, it's different people, different companies, different organizations trade, but they all fall under ultimately the same rules and regulations, and to include how jobs work. And this is what I think is really beautiful about the series, is each book is a different level of job. Specifically, the first book is Quarter Share, and the reason for this is your job level is based on a bonus that is paid out to everybody on the ship when a trading vessel sells its wares on a new planet. And the profit they make is split up into shares based on everybody involved with the shipment of the goods. The highest being, of course, the owner. Then you have the captain. And then From that, you have a double share, which is a very much like an officer. You have to go to the officer's academy, or you can still take the test without going to the academy. But from a political side, if you do not go to the academy, you don't look as good, so it's harder to get a job. From double share, then it's a full share, then it's half share, and of course the lowest is a quarter share, which is bottom of the barrel entry level job. I'm not familiar with the Navy, militarily speaking, but I feel like part of the world that these traders are in have a very like militaristic structure within these job levels and the way they're treated and the rules and regulations. And I'm not familiar enough with the Navy to know if it's the same, but part of that is, I know in the Navy, is you get on a ship for 6 months, then you finally get back to land for a little while, then you're back on a ship. And in this, it's very much that way. You get on a ship for the 6 weeks, 7 weeks it takes to get to the next port, where every day is the same. You're doing the same job every day. You have the people you work with become very much so a family. And then when you get to port, you have 4 or 5 days where you're able to go port side and for a short amount of time live like a normal person almost. It's very much so like being in the military myself. It's, you're not a civilian, you're military, and when those 4 or 5 days, it's you're in the civvy world, as we would say, and you get to do, you go out to a bar, you hang out, you hook up, whatever it might be, and it's just written very well to show this main character's progression on trying to better himself and learn more about this job he kind of was almost forced into, but finds he actually enjoys the camaraderie he has with being on a ship and sharing his experience with his shipmates. So he tries his best, and eventually, I mean, spoiler, but based on the title of all the books, it shows his progression, and by the end, he ends up owning the ship. So it's very, very good series. Like I said, I want to do a dedicated review on this because it really spoke to me, and I'll get back more into that when I talk about it. But it's a really good series, and I would recommend this for a lot of people, specifically anybody who has moved a lot growing up, or just in general had trouble making friends, because that's the one thing about the main character, is by being introduced to this new world, he makes real friends, true friends for the first time, and it really speaks to me. So that finishes what I've read for January, and I've already, with February already almost being over, have gotten another 7 or 8 books read already, slowing down a little bit, but I will talk about those in another video. And as always, leave a comment, let me know what you think if you've read these books. If you have an opinion, let me know. And I would also say, I'll see you the next time the wheel turns.